Welcome to the April 10th, 2023 Education Committee and Supplementary Regular Board Meeting of the Lower Merion Board of School Directors. The board believes it's in our best interest and the best interest of the students of the district to hear comments from district residents. An opportunity will be given later in the meeting for public comment, both in person and through the chat feature, which will be read by Ms. Buckman. This meeting is being live streamed and video recorded with sound for public broadcast. All participants joining via the webinar will need to use the chat feature, which will be enabled during audience recognition. I also want to note that Dr. Zotner is joining us via the sky, via conference. So first on our agenda for this evening is I just wanted to give a brief update on our superintendent search. As you may remember, we hired Hazard Young, Adia and Associates in March to help with the search for a new superintendent of schools. To that end, they have provided us both a leadership profile assessment and desired successor superintendent characteristic documents. These documents were created based on data obtained from the input that the HYA consultants received when they met with individuals and groups in either individual interviews or focus group settings. And from the results of the online survey that was completed in 2021 by community stakeholders. The surveys, interviews, and focus group meetings were structured to gather input to assist the board in determining the primary characteristics desired in the new superintendent. In addition, the stakeholder interviews and focus groups collected information regarding the strengths of the district and some of the challenges that it will be facing in the coming years. Just for some background, the interviews and focus groups included the following groups: the board, administration, both at the building level and central office, faculty, support staff, parents and guardians, community members, and high school students. The input was based on this, for each group was based on the same set of questions centered on challenges and strengths of the district and on the characteristics and skills desired in the successor superintendent. HYA noted that among the most frequent strengths perceived and discussed by focus group participants and during interviews is a strong academic performance and reputation of the school district. This includes the highly dedicated staff and the supportive and involved parent community. The students, however, continue to be the district's greatest point of pride. The challenges and issues facing the district include a desire for stable leadership to address concerns with delays in decision-making regarding academics, student and staff supports, start times, facilities, curriculum, and equitable financial allocations. Additionally, the new leader will need to balance competing interests between stakeholder groups in a highly political and somewhat divided community. A significant goal for the new superintendent will be balancing the traditions and excellence of Lower Merion while having the fortitude, savvy, and people skills to develop, plan, and implement creative and futuristic ideas and programs to best support Lower Merion students, parents, and staff. In addition, addressing inconsistencies that exist among the schools and grade levels, both academically and in terms of support, focused, and equity, will also need to be a focus for the new superintendent. There's a collective desire for an experienced, visible, engaged leader who is innovative, transparent, collaborative, student-centered educator who has a long-term commitment to creating the best possible learning environments for all students in Lmsb. Together with HYA, the board intends to meet the challenge of finding an individual who possesses most of the skills and character traits required to meet the needs of the district. The search team will seek a new superintendent who can work with the Lower Merion School Board to provide the leadership needed to continue to raise academic standards and student performance while meeting the unique needs of each of its schools, communities, and each student. So thank you to all the participants who attended the focus group meetings. The full leadership profile report and the desired superintendent successor characteristics document are in board docs tonight, and they will be posted on the Lmsb website in the next few days and are also currently on the HYA website. Bill Adams, who is our primary contact at HYA, noted that there are already a number of applications submitted, and they're also currently reaching out to any of the individuals or all of the individuals whose names were offered by stakeholders during focus groups and interviews. So if you have anyone that you would like to be considered, please reach out to Bill Adams with any additional names of potential candidates. And I believe that if you go onto the superintendent search section of the Lmsb website, it's one of the pieces that you can, note easily on the website. Bill Adams's contact information is there. So that is a quick and brief update, and I'm going to pass it on to Ms. Schaefer.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Exciting to be back from spring break. Welcome back, everyone. This evening we have a couple of presentations for you. One is a recap of our multi-tiered systems of support. Dr. Gaudioso will be leading that together with Dr. Martin Patone and Kelly Peterson and Will Williams. So we're excited to have them back. This was originally presented at the March 3rd, I believe, maybe early March CCOB meeting. Also this evening we'll be getting an update on the full day K planning process, survey results, but we'll start with Dr. Gaudioso. Thank you.
Thank you. We're excited to be here tonight. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Director of Elementary Education. Dr. Martin Patone is our Elementary Director, Supervisor of Humanities. Will Williams is one of our high school assistant principals, and Kelly Peterson is a school theme coordinator from one of our middle schools. As we're going through this presentation, we're going to be careful to unpack some of the language, the jargon that people may not be familiar with, but for those who may be downloading from the website, the very back page does have a glossary. So I'll get started. So this is an update on multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, and you're going to get to hear some examples of what this work looks like in the district and what may be next as we grow. So first of all, what is MTSS? It's really important to understand that MTSS is a framework or a way of organizing our efforts and our thinking about the systems that support students. So in particular, it is a way of working as a system that supports the whole child. And that is our why. MTSS supports all students. You can see the umbrella there. And under the umbrella of MTSS includes academics, it includes social emotional learning, it includes behavior, and it really brings teams together with a whole child focus. And when we think of MTSS as a framework and the teams and the participants involved in working with MTSS, we're all part of the system that makes up MTSS as we support students in various degrees or tiers of support. Some of the elements that make MTSS work include strong engaged leadership, and for that reason, the beginning of our work started with our leaders, and that includes our principals, some of our building leaders, some of our leaders who are here tonight. It includes evidence-based practices, data-based problem solving and decision-making, layered or tiered continuums of support, and student, school, and community engagement. So you'll get to hear a little bit about that tonight. So the understanding of this as a framework makes it really critical to understand that MTSS is not a program that students enter, it's not a place, it's not a particular resource. It is a conceptual framework where we are tying together aligned efforts. And it begs the question, why a framework for things already done? We already have academic support for students. We already have behavioral support for students, social emotional learning support, and of course regular ed instruction and data practices. So the idea of a framework that is making us more effective, efficient, coordinated, collaborative is at the heart of this, where instead of having silos of support, instead of having teams that are doing parts of the work of supporting students and then having to coordinate their own alignment, this takes us into highly integrated teams committed to increasing our own effectiveness, the greater collaboration as a result, more fluid internal coordination, better supporting students and increasing outcomes. So it really is part of bringing us together as effective teams, more effective teams. It's actually been really engaging and exciting to watch us grow. So strong and engaged leadership is at the heart of this, and when we're thinking about how we anchor that work, it's anchored in our Lmsb priorities. So at the bottom of our pyramid here, safety, equity, inclusivity, and belonging. We're committed to every student feeling safe, feeling included, so that they feel comfortable and part of a learning environment and can be successful. Also directing our work is our strategic plan, All Forward, and all of the pillars and priorities within that. When we look at student experiences, related to the strategic plan, an important question we have to ask is, how are all of our students experiencing our efforts? How well is every student enjoying access, a sense of belonging, and how do we personalize our approach to further and better support students so that they are reaching the top of that pyramid and achieving our vision as a district so that they really are leaving empowered as learners? So part of the work of MTSS, it's a state framework. It's a national framework. Pennsylvania has its own model for this. But every district that begins the journey has to determine what will it mean, what will it look like in our own district. So at the beginning of this work, we had our teams, our leadership teams came together and worked with our consultant on what is our vision for the work, what will MTSS mean for us. And you can see some of the bolded words here were key ideas that resonated across our team of principals and academic council. We wanted our teams to be empowered. We wanted shared responsibility where we all take ownership for the success of all students. We wanted our data and our use of data to be meaningful. We wanted a whole child focus. And as we talked about what is it going to look like, how do we define it, you'll see those words again, team-based, equitable access for all students, aligning our differentiated supports and pathways for success. So this is part of our guiding vision for this particular work. Critical to successful implementation of MTSS is evidence-based practices, and that's across the various tiers of instruction that may be provided or available to students. And it's also connected to our work as leaders, as team members, and as educators looking at student data. So these evidence-based practices become part of our conversation, not just what do we think will work, but why do we think it will work. And this idea of integrating best practices into instruction asks us to ask different questions at different times. What is it that all students need? And that would be our core instruction. So if you look at this triangle, the stacked triangles there, those layers represent what you can think of as the tiers of support. So no student is assigned to one particular tier at the exclusion of others. All students are part of Tier 1. And that's where that base layer is representing what all students need. Some students may need a little more. So we may call that core plus more. We may call that Tier 2. And you'll see there's a little slice of green on the yellow where we're offering some things to some students. Sometimes that support can be in the regular classroom in core programs. Sometimes it's a push in or pull out with some extra support. And then a final question is, what do a few of the students need beyond that core plus more? And that's where some students may get some support from a Tier 3 instruction. And one thing that's really important to understand is there's no such thing as a Tier 2 or Tier 3 or even a Tier 1 student. These are layers of instruction that change in intensity or frequency or target according to students' need and use of data. And we're talking about instruction when we're talking about tiers. So students may participate in Tier 2 instruction, but we do not group students by tier or any type of labeling that is lasting, because they can have a need one day, and based on assessment, it's very flexible and fluid and ideally responsive to what students need. So one thing that's important in the goals that we set for this year, our goal this year was to look at something called team-initiated problem solving. And we thought it was really important to start with data because the data tells us where our students are, how they are experiencing the current learning environment. And these questions that you can see on this slide really help us make sure that we are the ones who are modifying, adapting, responding, and being flexible to the needs of students. And we're looking at what is it about the interaction of the curriculum and the learner, the instruction and the learner, the environment and the learner that we should be altering so that students experience more success and can grow. And you'll also see the other red bullet, what supports do staff need? So in looking at how our teachers and our data teams and the various teams and PLCs or professional learning communities are working with data, it gives us an opportunity to ask how do we support teachers with resources that they can better support students with. So this team-initiated problem solving is an evidence-based data protocol. It's actually approved as a evidence-based strategy in What Works Clearinghouse, and it is tied to stronger outcomes for students, more effectiveness with teams in targeting interventions that support what students need. So it really allows teams to be more effective and efficient. And starting there helps us also to ask the right questions of instruction, asks the right questions of curriculum in order to make sure that we're providing increased layers as students need them, but also really looking at how we're delivering what we're trying to offer and how students experience that. Here's another image that represents that TIPS process, and what's really important to remember is it's team-initiated problem solving. So if you're familiar with action research or an inquiry cycle, the team-initiated problem solving cycle is very much like that, where we are asking questions of the data and working through hypotheses that are data-based for action designed to solve a particular problem. It includes progress monitoring, and teachers are asked to be very precise with identification of the problem, and in that way they can offer an appropriately targeted intervention to support students. So this data-based problem solving and decision making, we're going to talk through a couple examples of what that looks like at the various levels. So in the elementary schools, there are a couple cycles of teams that work through the team-initiated problem solving. One might be an elementary data team, and this would be a data team that is looking at the elementary student performance as a building. They may be a grade level PLC where you have a team of teachers. A PLC is a professional learning community, and that tends to be made up of job-alike teachers who are teaching the same content on a team, and they would be looking at the success of instruction, the needs of students, and their needs to adapt or design targeted instruction or support for students. And finally, as teachers are providing and planning those interventions, they come back to the data team with conversation and progress monitoring on how did that go. So those groups on the left that show the cycle of some of the data teams, if you follow the arrow across the bottom to the gears, and it's all anchored around that TIPS process, which is represented by that inquiry process in the middle. The gears, you get to see a couple of the ways that people use the data to support students. It could be in Tier 1 or core instruction. So teams, grade level PLCs may look at how did students perform on an assessment, what are the needs of the group, what do all of the students need, what do some of the students need, what do a few of the students need, and they may look at Tier 1 support in small groups in the classroom. They may also look at grade level win time. So this is an example of those cycles. Part of the conversation is really looking at interventions and how they're tied to core standards, how they're prioritizing access to core, and how we're developing shared responsibility as teams to make sure that we're supporting all students. So this is a simplified view of the steps of the process teams are working through. They're using data about student learning, student learning information, student performance data. They're asking questions of that data. They're developing a precision statement that helps them to identify any challenges or needs the students had with learning, the learning targets. They reflect on why that was. Do they need to go back to instruction? Do they need set specific goals for the group? And then how do they improve that? You can see here there's a quote from a first grade teacher, which was really exciting. The teachers are feeling empowered as they go through this and taking ownership. So the first grade team, in learning this process through the facilitation of our instructional support teachers, started to take ownership and were planning their own next data cycle, which was really exciting. So let's just see that quote. They're pretty proud of what they've accomplished, and they're owning and planning their own group interventions. So this is an example of what the team-initiated problem-solving form looks like. In elementary and middle school, we've started with the Tier 1. The idea is that we want to leverage access to Tier 1 and do everything we can to identify, eliminate, reduce, prevent gaps from emerging. So we really look at how are students experiencing core instruction. This problem-solving form is useful for helping teams follow this evidence-based process. And the closer they are to fidelity with the process, the stronger they are to aligning their outcomes, to improving the student outcomes, and really aligning the interventions to the identified need and that precise problem that they have worked together to name and research and work with our supervisors and coaches and specialists on what is an appropriate intervention. One other benefit of the form, since everyone is using it, it also gives us common language for our practices K-12. Additionally, it helps teams hold one another accountable for adhering to an effective practice. So when teams are at the end, one of the reflection points is, how well did we do with this today? And it includes front-loading, what are the assessments we need to look at? What did students just learn? How did they perform on a recent assessment? How do we support them? So these are some of the tools that the facilitation of which help the teachers to really make sure that we are asking all the right questions of instruction and curriculum. One thing that's really important and to remember is PBIS is also a part of MTSS, and you saw that in the opening umbrella. And while we're talking a lot about some of the academic issues, you'll hear some of that today as we're talking through use of data. PBIS includes social emotional learning and behavior, and we have Tier 1 programs and practices in place, and all of our teams include that at the table when they're talking about student progress and performance. So if you think back to those puzzle pieces fitting together, during a TIPS or a team-initiated problem-solving meeting, the teams are able to talk about the whole child. They're able to talk about any needs for additional support for a group. They can look at behavior in a cafeteria and talk about, should we do an interactive modeling of what behavior should look like. So it's really getting to the teaching and prevention and culture and community building part of social emotional learning and behavior. It also includes our responsiveness to student needs for learning and looking at behavior as that teachable moment. And we have, our teams are also engaged with both responsive classroom, which is a lot of the prevention and community building, as well as the restorative practices. So the folks who are at the table during a TIPS process include the school counselor, it can include the social worker, it can include the instructional support team teachers at the older grade levels. It may include a broader representation of teams, and you'll hear some of that. So it's a part of MTSS, and we've dipped our toes in some areas of Tier 1 this year in terms of articulating and aligning our practices. And as we continue to grow, we'll be moving, we'll talk a little bit at the end about, where are we going next. So I'm going to invite Kelly Peterson to come up. Kelly is a school culture coordinator at one of our middle schools, and she'll talk a little bit about what this process looks like there.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gaudioso, and hello to everyone. I'm really excited to have the chance to speak to what's happening at the middle schools throughout the district, and I'm really here on behalf of several of my colleagues to share the amazing work that's happening. So as Dr. Gaudioso said, I'm the coordinator of school culture at Black Rock. This is actually a more recently created role. At the middle school levels, we've strategically created a coordinator of student interventions and a coordinator of school culture. And it's really with this goal of bringing MTSS to the middle school. The coordinator of student interventions is a little bit more focused on the academic side of the interventions that we're seeing. And my position, the coordinator of school culture, is more focused on the behavioral side. So we work really closely together as partners in our buildings and across the buildings. And of course, members of that larger team working very closely with our administrators, our amazing, school counselors, our social workers, our psychologists, our teachers, and so many more, our nurses. So really bringing everyone together in this process to make sure that all of our students can meet success and looking at the whole student. So if you take a look, you're going to see a very similar slide to what you saw at the elementary level. Because the middle school is structured a little differently, as we look at, again, the TIPS process being kind of that central guiding force that takes us, through MTSS. But when you look at the left side, you're really focused on, how are we bringing people together in different ways at the middle school. So we have our grade level team meetings, because in the middle school we're teamed. So that's bringing together, those core teachers that are interacting with the students in multiple areas, as well as the grade level counselor, administrators, the coordinators step into those meetings. And, that's a look at the whole child and where they're meeting success, focusing on their strengths as well as areas of weakness and what supports we need to provide to our students to help them meet greater success. We have our grade level PLCs, so whether that's a math PLC or an ELA PLC or science, we're really focused on using data, again, to identify what supports are needed where students are experiencing success or not yet meeting success. Our leadership team is a big piece of this. And then you'll also see the achievement team, which is where we really bring together a group of people that are ready to problem solve and brainstorm solutions for our students who, again, are not yet meeting success. So as we discuss students who need some of those extra supports, we're sitting around on a regular basis with the counselors, the social worker, the psychologist, and bringing together people that can really work through that process. The intersections of all of these teams together and the effective use of data really allows us to come together in meaningful ways. And it's, again, we're focusing a lot on our Tier 1 interventions this year, but as we move through, into the 3 to 5 year process, we're really excited for what these teams can do together. When we are looking at how that happens, again, the gears that you see off to the right, Tier 1 instruction, again, is really what's happening in the classroom for all students. And of course, those are conversations that are happening both at those grade level meetings, the grade level PLCs, and so on. How can we improve that instruction to make sure we're meeting the needs of all of our students? And then how do we provide more targeted interventions? For those of you that might be familiar with the middle school schedule, we have a period at the end of every day called I&E, which stands for Intervention and Enrichment. And it's a great opportunity for us to provide some of these interventions that are needed. Edficiency is a tool that is really powerful. We've found it extremely useful, where not only can students self-select a teacher that they want to go see during that time, but teachers are also able to select students. And that tool has really allowed us to provide targeted interventions and also track where students are and monitor them in a really powerful way. So as we start to implement and use that in different ways, we're finding a lot of success in that. When we think about some examples, specific examples, so again, we're focused a lot on Tier 1. So in the previous slide, you saw how the cycle helps teachers to refine their classroom core instruction to support learning. But as we review data and we have discussions about student concerns, about what we're seeing through classroom observations, we often think about, what is it that's not happening at the classroom level and that Tier 1 instruction that we need to improve? What supports and strategies and resources can we provide to our teachers to help them? So what you see in this slide on the left are top 3 priority strategies that we wanted our teachers to focus on in the classroom, where we felt it would really benefit the greatest number of students. And you can see the 3 that are provided here of clear directions, monitoring, and reinforcement. And this is just an example of a resource that was given to our staff members, to our teachers to, again, support what they're doing in the classroom so that the Tier 1 instruction can be consistent, that consistent messaging, and really using some of those most powerful strategies to help support our students. And when you look on the right side, you're seeing some of those Tier 2 interventions. And again, that's really what we're looking to build in the coming years. But again, providing more targeted interventions that will support our students, again, as we're looking at what is needed by all students, what's needed by some, and then a few. So that's what you're seeing in terms of some examples. And finally, looking at the idea of academic interventions as well as behavior interventions. We all know, which is so important, that our students, in order to meet success, have to feel that sense of belonging. They need to feel safe. They need to feel connected. And that's really a lot of our work that we're doing on the behavior side of things. So our focus in this area is really to be proactive. And when we think about the strategies that we're using to support our students, what are we doing up front? A lot of times in restorative practices and PBIS, we talk about the 80-20 rule, where 80% of our time should really be focused on what we're doing proactively to support our students, whereas the 20% should be focused more on that reactive piece, where we might be looking to address specific behavior issues or to repair or restore. But that 80% is such a critical time. And what we're trying to do in that regard is build relationships, create a sense of community, again, where all students feel they can trust someone, they feel that sense of belonging, and they feel connected to our schools. Across all of our middle schools, Ballackinwood, Black Rock, and Welsh Valley, one of the ways that we do this is support positive behavior expectations with our students. Be safe, be respectful, be responsible are some of those core things that you see consistently across the buildings. Ballackinwood has kind of adapted that a little bit into Pillar Pride, but you again see that consistent messaging. And what we do with that, of course, is we explicitly teach these skills and model these behaviors that we're expecting of our students right from the beginning of the year. And that could happen from a large group like expectation assembly, that might happen through posters or consistent messaging around the building, classroom-based or community meetings, and then also small group and those targeted supports where we always go back to those consistent expectations. Teachers, of course, are encouraged to use these same expectations in their classroom. So students are thinking about, what does it look like to be safe in the cafeteria or the dining hall? What does it look like to be safe in a classroom or a hallway? And we're using that same messaging throughout the building. And of course, at the start of the school year, we do a lot of teaching and modeling, but this is something that's consistently reinforced and reset throughout the school year. Social emotional learning, as Dr. Gaudioso spoke about, is also critical, and we do a lot to address this within the middle schools. Whether it's a targeted lesson that we're doing or whether teachers are just integrating it into their core instruction, we're really trying to build students' skills of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, their relationship skills, and of course, responsible decision-making. When we think about restorative practices, these are some examples of ways that we're interacting with our students to build that sense of community in our classrooms and also, kind of get to the heart of that reflective process when things aren't going well or students aren't being successful. We have, morning meetings for our lower house in our buildings, so 5th and 6th graders participate there. We also look at using that I&E time effectively to deliver a lot of our social emotional learning. Our counselors are critical in this role, of course, offering lunch bunch opportunities and small groups to really provide some of those proactive supports to our students. And again, these elements of these positive behavior systems are not just happening, one time, it's consistent throughout the year. At the heart of that, just like when we talk about academic interventions, data is critical because it really provides us with the information that's going to inform our actions moving forward. So we do look at the data of, where are some of our behavior referrals coming in? Where are we seeing some of those areas that are of concern, and what do we need to do differently? What do we have to do in terms of the whole system, how that's functioning, as well as the design of individualized supports. So it takes us back to looking at what are the supports needed for all students versus some versus a few. And that brings together, just like with our achievement team, it brings together our teachers, our administrators, our social workers, our counselors, and all of those people that can play some critical roles in being part of the problem-solving process. Finally, one last thing I want to highlight is across all of our middle schools, we also want to find ways to celebrate our students and the amazing things that they are doing, to acknowledge their hard work and their efforts. So we see a lot of things like sending positive praise postcards home to students, building positive incentive systems within the schools, team awards or team shout-outs to recognize individual students or groups of students, and then of course meaningful ways to build community, whether it's like spirit weeks or school-wide celebrations, just again trying to give students that sense of belonging where they're having fun coming to school and they're feeling connected to their community. So thank you for your time and attention. I'm going to turn it over to Will Williams, who's the AP at Harriton High School, to talk a little bit about some high school examples.
Okay, everyone. Good evening. Such wonderful information presented by people before me. I hope to, I don't know how I'll probably be efficient and sound fast because high school is only in year one of this process, so keep that in mind. But I want to note that Dr. Fadibi and I are and I say this carefully, I say representatives for the two high schools, and that's important to note because when you design these teams at the high school level, you're dealing with big groups. And the goal is, as Becky Millspaw has told us through MCIU, is the assistant principal is not the lead. You are one of a group of part of MTSS of your achievement team. That's really important to kind of note because a lot of people will turn to you. So one of my goals this year, I know it's the same thing for Olafemi over with Lower Merion High School as I'm at Harriton High School, was to make sure that the team understands that we want to have a facilitator, and as an administrator, your support for anything related to that, you become that support, but the lead is the team in front of you. You are one of the team. So when there's issues that you cannot claim to have all the answers for, that you turn to the team and you're one of them. And that's something I know that, at least through Harriton's lens, we've been really trying to build this year in some ways. So let me flip there. So that's what you see a little different. That's why we went to this slide as opposed to the slide with the fun circles and loops and everything, is the fact that for the high school, we already had a structure. We already had the Lower Merion High School Achievement Team and then HAT, I don't want to say teams, kind of repetitive, but the Harriton Achievement Team, where we were already doing elements of Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. The structure got a little loosened, as you can imagine, during the last couple years. So one of the things that Dr. Fadibi and I wanted to do is to reboot, tighten up, use the language, use the wording, reset what we want these achievement teams to be, which was perfect to start with Tiers 2 and Tier 3 because we already had a structure. We just wanted to make it with the language that we're now infusing through MTSS. So that's where you see the arrows with the few and the sum, because our primary focus is to get the Tier 2 and Tier 3, the sum and the few, in a really good structured place with common language, so that when we decide, we are already in the process, but when we start talking to the teams and eventually the school at large, that we've been dabbling that already through some faculty meetings, with how Tier 1 can operate, it does come off structurally a little different than the other levels. The important thing is the common language, and that's something I really want to reiterate. And when you look at that circle, you see that's carrying through all three levels. That's a big piece of difference between middle school, elementary school, and high school, is because high school is literally in year one, and that's something we have to keep in mind. So you see here, this is, again, the fun structure here, where one thing to consider differently is you notice that data team is at the top. Data team and achievement team are two separate entities at the high schools. So one of the big goals this year is to get those two groups really collaborating in a much more focused way. And we've been working on that through, again, the common language, common goals and expectations. So data team's number one focus isn't primarily always on keystones, but all the data team needs throughout the whole building. So that was the goal of the two teams working together to try to make that language work better. For high school level teachers, departments, teams, and PLCs, ninth grade has ninth grade teams, where the students are put in certain teams, and of course those teachers and the assistant principal and the PLC coordinator, they work together week to week to week with those small groups of students in different meetings per week. But once they leave ninth grade, you have grade level, subject level PLCs. And that is probably, if you see the data team to achievement team to there, that is the real work, is utilizing not only Tier 2 and Tier 3 to get them to understand the common language, so when they submit a referral, we can see how they're utilizing that language for a student. It's also to get the Tier 1 to become part of the grade level, subject level teams, to where we're not an achievement team going to those teams and saying, you develop what we call a precision statement. Here's the data, what do you think? They seek that from us. They create the goal they want to make for an intervention, and then they put that into action, come back again, see if that's worked over a period of time, bring it back, and then say the achievement team can come in and offer something at another level. So it's really getting the subject level teams to really, one, understand the language of MTSS and what we're trying to do, and two, to have that systematic structure that they can go to again and again and again to get the results we want with students. So if you see that arrow going to the right, these are part of the tier 2, tier 2 and tier 3 aspects that are already occurring. So looking at improving effectiveness in processes of lunch and learn. So lunch and learn, as you know, learn 1 or learn 2, the student can have lunch, and then the other learn they can meet with a teacher. Well, we have processes in place where they can go to a specific teacher through HAT, the Heritage Achievement Team, or they can go see a counselor and then work that way through a scheduled meeting. So that's one of those interventions we can do with lunch and learn that becomes very effective for those students. The other piece is as you see, PLC and teacher interventions. So that's another piece that kind of, again, comes out of tier 1, but also is part of tier 2 and tier 3. And then you have communications, which has been, for me, in this role as interim assistant principal, integral as an option for students who might need an additional week, 2 days a week, 1 day a week support with the communications teacher on organization, on how they can map out their week, on what they can focus on and prioritize. If they're behind, what should they consider essential? We've had several students move in from the HAT team to the communications class that's definitely had, data-proven results for those students. And you see the TIPS model there, which again has been well explained throughout, so I don't want to go back into that again, but the goal is it's always driven from that problem-solving model. Here is a high school form. The one thing I wanted to note that I thought was important, that was said earlier, but I think it's always good to hear, is that the framework is not a form. The form is the support. We're the framework. The team's the framework. The structure's the framework. The forms support that. But we don't want to rely on the forms to kind of drive us into a robotic expectation when students' needs change, where students move from a tier 1 whole group to tier 2, tier 3. That can modify what we would do with a form and where students are within that form. So I always keep in mind, because when I work with the HAT team over at Harriton, they'll often say, well, what's the form going to do? How are we going to utilize the form? How's the form going to change things? And I'm always pushing back and saying it's a process. The form's a support for the process. So that's just a kind of change in mindset that we're trying to work through this year in year 1. And then when you look at versions of tier 1 interventions that are already in place, and I have to give Dr. Johnson credit for his time at Harriton and also at Lower Merion, with this idea of having kind of an overarching theme for the building. For us, it's Ram Pride. For Lower Merion High School, it's ACES. And just say for the 9th grade, like 9th grade teams, they will create a letter. And they'll put pride in there in the letter, and they'll put the student's name in, and they'll list the ways that the student has met those, and they'll send that letter to the parents. Because we know, as parents too, that we often sometimes when we get that phone call, or we get that email, or we get that communication from school, not always the positive, and it's nice when they receive something like that, but also is within our framework of MTSS. It's from the framework of the themes of the school, and that's something that I think is really important. Not sure if the Lower Merion High School version of that has put in place yet, because the ACES structure is their first year of really making that happen. But it is neat to see that the 2 high schools can take a version of Tier 1, individualize it, but share a common goal. And I think that's a key point there. And then restorative practices at the high school level, again, it's always ensuring that restorative practices are not part of consequence, but a structure usable within Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 to allow students to work through issues, work at a remediation or a resolution of those issues, and then come to agreement to move the process forward. So consequences are only on the other side of when those expectations might not be met, but it's important to note that in terms of its support overall. And one thing I want to know, because I made this a note as well, is being in this district for 10 years as a teacher, in this position now in my interim role, one of the things I've always lamented is that the common language, that I should be able to go to a kindergarten teacher, a first grade teacher, and use some of the same language of MTSS with them, and they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And vice versa. They can come to me and say, a middle school teacher can say, I know the students is in 11th grade, we did close work with them in 8th grade with these aspects. What are your thoughts? Where are they now? And we're not trying to teach each other, the lingo. We know what how to communicate, how to talk to each other through the K through 12 structure with MTSS. So I just thought it was important to say that, because from a teacher standpoint, that is very, very important, because I know that's been a frustration. So, thank you. And I'll bring it back to Gaudioso.
So those are a couple examples of what the data practices related to team-initiated problem-solving look like in the buildings. One of the other really important elements that you have heard about is Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and this idea of a layered continuum of supports. You should have also heard a lot of team-initiated collaboration, and it really is grounded in stakeholder involvement, and Dr. Martin Patone is going to be a little more specific. You kind of had a high level with the framework. She's going to give some specific examples from the curriculum, but I just want to give a lot of credit to the stakeholder building work that she has done across teams and grade levels that's representative of what all our supervisors are trying to do.
Okay, thank you so much for your attention and patience, and we're almost through here. We're going to get into a little more of, as we said, the practicality of what does this look like. You heard that throughout the presentation. In terms of curriculum and instruction, we are building the infrastructure, and there's a focus on a strong core program in Tier 1. Our focus is definitely on leveraging up Tier 1 support, and this is inclusive of universal screeners and classroom instruction. We moved towards math screeners this year and into next year, and we implemented the Foundations program as one of our programs in Tier 1. We also reorganized the utilization of our literacy specialists to have a push-in support in addition to a pull-out support, so that also leverages up our Core 1 instruction. So the example you're looking at right now is a schedule articulation. One of the things I want to point out is the color coding. It is purposeful. It matches up with the tiers of support, tan being Tier 1, blue being Tier 2. There isn't any reflection of Tier 3 on this schedule articulation. The areas where you see those colors allows you to, and a teacher and a building administrator, any member of our team, to see where can we provide the push-in supports necessary, if necessary, and when would we be able to pull out for Tier 2 support, if necessary. This way we can ensure that students aren't missing any core instruction. The other part of the scheduling articulation allows us to be more efficient, effective, and equitable in terms of our resources, including our personnel, as I just mentioned, and also our programs and our time. Although this is given in this schedule, it doesn't mean these things happen in that sequential order. Morning meeting is definitely the beginning of each day. It was mentioned earlier in the presentation. It is where our students learn to build relationships and build community, and we establish a safe place for learning. That is not just happening in the morning, it just sets the stage for the day. As you noticed on the left, there are times delineated for certain areas of ELA instruction and learning. These times are for fidelity to the programs and the resources for the learning to happen, although there is some fluidity in terms of decision-making with, for instance, Haggerty, phonemic awareness, and the decodable readers, which can also happen during guided reading station or in the WIN time. This also shows that we want to devote our programs to hit all the areas of literacy and provide additional time in WIN that is devoted for that intervention or possibly enrichment time, as you also heard mentioned for the middle school example. This is an example of our emphasis, re-emphasis on formative assessment and immediate feedback. So we're not waiting, it's in the moment. And it isn't about one assessment, but it's about multiple assessments to show growth over time. And the one to the left is focused on the standards that were taught during a specific unit and where students are in their progress towards proficiency in those standards. To the right, actually these documents are on our shared Google Drive for supporting instruction, is an I can statement. So serves as an instructional checklist and also a conversation point with students to say, I can do these things that are associated with a standard, or where am I in terms of not yet, but progressing towards that standard. The academic intervention, this is a sample for grade K. I mentioned universal screeners, and again, the colors associated with the tiers of support. Across the top is all of the core academic instruction and included in kindergarten early language intervention. We then provide universal screeners, and there's this if-then decision-making rules. So if a student would have some issues in terms of the assessment with concepts of print, then here are some things that we should look at and monitor or try to implement immediately to see if we're able to get that layer of progress or possibly something was missed. Blue would only come in if it was in addition to, and we wouldn't go there until we've tried all those things in the then area. Prior to moving on to the next slide, I just want to say I want to give all of the teams and teachers credit in terms of this was a coordinated team effort, those documents that you saw previously. When we talk about change, it always is, so what does this mean for me? And we want to honor the multiple perspectives. So from the student lens, students are able to be involved in different learning groups. They may have different teachers coming in at different times to push in and work with small groups and have those collaborative conversations and elicit higher order thinking through their questioning that they may not have seen previously. The family lens, you may hear students talking about having teachers push in or working with different groups in these collaborative learning experiences. You also, the previous slide where we talked about that immediate feedback and more than one data point will be part of the family conversation and things that you will hear more often moving forward. Lastly, the teachers are now involved in the TIPS process, and they have an instrumental role in the problem solving when we want to talk about data, qualitative and quantitative, to discuss what are our immediate next steps. And the improvements in the curriculum articulation and strengthening instruction and team decision-making, teachers are essential and crucial to that process. So with that, I will turn over to Dr. Godioso.
So just to go back to our big picture goals for the year, the one you heard about a lot was the team-initiated problem solving. And, I just give credit to the many folks involved in learning that. We had all of our principals part of the training and assistant principals, and they've been leads in their buildings and really have taken ownership of this, in addition to our building leaders like our school culture coordinators and our instructional support teams, and at the high school assistant principals, really trying to lead that work so that we become highly effective, integrated, and collaborative. We want to continue to build the supportive infrastructure. We have great things happening. We have really dedicated teachers, and they've been doing great things for students, and we want to just continue to build that infrastructure so that great work is articulated and aligned, and we continue to improve it. And we want to continue to coach those building and data teams to be more effective on behalf of students, and we'll continue to build principal and team leaders. And this year, another focus is really making sure we're very clear on why we're meeting, why we're looking at data, so that teams are, we have that tendency, to focus on big data in education, and we look at PSSA scores and keystones, but really looking at the everyday learning information that student performance gives us has just been part of bigger data team conversations, which is exciting. So that'll continue this year. As we move into next year, goals for next year will be set at the end of this year by our district team, which represents stakeholders from each of the buildings, and we'll work in consultation with our consultant and with our own leadership team. The idea of this curriculum instruction infrastructure, the estimate is it takes 3 to 5 years to fully develop and implement a highly effective MTSS framework. Elements of it that we would be moving into next year would include some professional learning to support tips or team-initiated problem solving for the teacher level professional learning communities. Right now, the training in that has really focused on our leaders, and teacher job embedded learning has taken place as teachers have experienced other people facilitating those sessions. And as Will Williams was saying, it's not about the form, it's about the process. But the process, we know that we want to have fidelity of implementation because it's highly effective. So classroom teacher training will continue. One thing that, as you heard Dr. Martin Patone talk about, the curriculum and instruction professional development that teachers have undergone as part of, for example, foundations. Teachers are being trained in curriculum, resources, and classroom instruction related to perhaps their content. However, it's still connected to this work of developing a strong core. So while teachers may not be thinking of that as this is part of MTSS training, this is part of MTSS training because it's related to strengthening our, what we offer. And we'll be moving into more targeted social emotional learning and PBIS work for students. And, you heard parts of our work this year focused on Tier 1 in grades K to 8, but we'll be digging more into articulating at other levels as well. So that concludes what we wanted to share, and we appreciate your time and attention, and all of you for hanging in there with us because we're really excited about the work so far.
Thank you all for your time and your presentation tonight. I wanted to open it up to the board for questions. Sure, go ahead, Ms. Sherrick.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I really appreciate it. I have a few questions. I'm trying to get my thoughts together. So first, I just want to acknowledge that the basis for the schedule to have WIN, INE, and Lunch and Learn across all three levels is really unprecedented to then be able to integrate MTSS and additional supports. I hear at the middle school with the coordinator of school interventions and coordinator of school culture that it seems much more integrated, that they're able to really keep track of every single student. I'm curious at the elementary level, who is actually responsible for ensuring that TIPS is done regularly, because data review cycles are only effective if done with fidelity, accountability, and we're making sure that every kid is getting what they need. And connected to the high school piece, I wanted to understand why we made the choice to integrate as Tier 2 grade level and subject level teams versus kid by kid, which would be a more comprehensive picture and aligned to the model that you outlined. So that's my first question.
All right, it has multiple parts, so I'll start with the elementary first.
Okay.
It's actually bigger picture. Accountability, what we lead with is, the principals need to be leaders of MTSS in their buildings, period. They are the instructional leader in that building. So that accountability for how is it going and what is happening, those are conversations that we're having, and they meet with our consultant and their teams. Their team leads have been phenomenal. So we've had a practice since we started this of meeting with the instructional support team weekly. Both for K to 4 and for 5 to 8. So every single Monday we're meeting on how's it going, what's happening, show us an example, with the idea of how can we support you to strengthen this. And our consultant joins those meetings sometimes. In the spring we started pulling those teams separately from just that meeting to do even more of the curriculum articulation work with Dr. Martin Patone and Nancy Akanji-Mesa and Lauren Hopkins and Jason Lilly, our other supervisors. So it really is a district-wide conversation. So I think when you ask about accountability, I think there are multiple layers to it. One is are the data cycles happening? Those data meetings are planned and embedded. The accountability for student progress, that becomes part of the...
No. I mean accountability for staff to actually do the data cycles. So those forms are great. Yeah. And they're nice, but how are we actually using data and making sure that every kid is actually getting what they need for the
Yeah.
wind black?
So that would be the folks who are in the roles that you've heard from. So when we had the CCOB session, 2 of the elementary instructional support team teachers represent the people who are leading that work. So they've set up the cycle of meetings, the grade level teams are attending, so those are happening.
So they'd be able to provide us with the number of students and number of students in each different intervention per the block?
Keep in mind, they're looking at tier 1.
So no.
Well, in tier 1, you're going to have different ways that we're tracking students because you're setting a goal for a whole class or a cohort, right? So they're looking at those questions of all, some, or few. If we're looking at monitoring student progress, that's another layer of accountability. And just for understanding data warehousing practices, Illuminate is a new tool, right? So we've had WIN, we've had literacy support, math support, and we've had specialists who have been providing interventions for students long before we started MTSS, and they're responsible for progress monitoring. Some of that data has lived in places like Dibbles, where it's lived in like our DRP, cloud-based programs, and then we pull that data when we're having data meetings. Right now, some of that data, when we're looking at like what you're talking about is like individual students, some of that is still living in, for example, a place like Dibbles until we move into Illuminate for some of those. So as we're moving into the infrastructure, which Illuminate represents, that has the capacity to do progress monitoring within that system. That was not a this year goal. It really was getting effective data practices in place, keep storing your data where you're storing it, have your data meetings about that data, and they maintain the same accountability that they've had for that, where they're looking at an achievement team. These students who've come up for team and been recommended or referred, we're looking at how effective is the intervention, and the teams have that particular question at the team level. Now, if we're speaking specifically of literacy or math, that would be something like the literacy or math specialists could speak to with their specific caseloads. So right now, it's not universally housed in our data warehouse, but it will be.
Okay, I have more questions on that, but I'll leave it. So can you answer the second part on the high school, why the decision was made
the why,
to do?
so in working with our consultant, one of the really important things we wanted to recognize is the high school was coming to this work for the first time this year. So they went through the training, and our consultant talked about how 2 things. One, the PLC structure was ideal for working with data, working with the TIPS process, but the achievement team was already in place, and finding an entry point into the work was part of the goal. So where is the place that makes the most sense to start an entry point? And when you think about core or tier 1 at the high school, there are so many subject areas, so many different content teams that the feasibility of doing it in their first year was a little more complex. They do have strong PLCs, however. So the mileage or the growth that was possible by taking advantage of an achievement team that they already wanted to reboot because of things not falling apart, but frameworks and some practices maybe becoming less consistent or aligned during COVID. The opportunity to reboot, as Mr. Williams was saying, was there. Additionally, the impact they could have with grade level or PLC content teams was profound because they can bring data back to teams as they're looking at data and learning those practices. So the decision there was really just what's the most effective entry point for them.
And long term, is it to move to the true model of MTSS, or you're going to keep the structure as is?
For high school?
Yes.
High school, they're just in year 1, so they're going to continue the work, yeah.
So it is the goal. Okay, and then based on the academic data presentation given in November, I was quite surprised to not see that as a goal because it's very evident from that data that we are not effectively delivering on tier 1 curriculum. And so I'm just curious why that isn't part of this presentation or a consideration of the leadership.
I wouldn't say it isn't. What I would say is that's part of our context. So when we're looking at data and they're looking at individual students, I'll say a couple things about that. When we're looking at curricular infrastructure, it's part of that conversation, right? How is every student experiencing it? When we're looking at student and achievement gaps, it's really important for us to look beyond just the one score, look at the multiple scores, and get to what's called that precision statement. Why do we think this is happening for this particular student? So, and Dr. James Cole, or Ms. James Cole's, that idea of we need to know each student's individual story is part of the work. So at the team level, that's where that may be happening at the achievement team level. So it wouldn't be that it's not a goal. Like when you think about the TIPS process, the team initiated problem solving, it's all about effective use of data, and it's all about looking carefully at students' precision statements on the why, and then looking at our effective response to it. That would be embedded in these processes. So the idea that we looked at a couple different models when we were looking at data practices, like the Harvard, the DataWise project, their partnership with the Boston schools. The reason this one was selected was it is evidence-based and it will make teams stronger. And when we look at something as complex as an achievement gap, trying to make sure our teams really have a solid approach to speaking to data, working with data, was something that we're really committed to. So that is part of our why. It just doesn't have a new part of our presentation, but it's embedded in all we do.
So two things. I wasn't only referring to the opportunity gap, which is the evolved language on racial disparities in data. So that's one. Two, I was speaking to the gap across grade bands, multitudes of levels, and the drop in the national scores that mirror our district. So I'm just surprised and would like to see more intentionality around MTSS being used in our tier 1 supports to address those very real issues that we continue to skate over as a district in every presentation about curriculum from my purview.
So Dr. Martin Patone presented more language arts examples because she was giving the elementary example. Nancy Akanchi-Amesa has been working with her teams, and what I will say is, in terms of looking at student data, I mean, down to the student, when we're looking at students and data, they know their students and they're unpacking that information. Additionally, part of what you heard Dr. Martin Patone talk about was moving into a universal screener for math, and those decisions have been made with the commitment to address some of what you're talking about. We just happened to pick the language arts to highlight.
Ms. Garrison? Thank you for the presentation. I was just curious. I was looking at the intervention sample for kindergarten, and I was curious how many students, or what percentage of our students that come in kindergarten need intervention?
Off the top of my head.
I mean, just a ballpark.
I think because intervention can be so varied, you have students with just different, rates of retention, different needs day to day, that, intervention is so broad, it really could be.
Okay, how about I flip it? How many students don't need any intervention?
Yeah.
So, just to answer a couple of questions, in terms, not as many as you would think. There is definitely, as soon as they come in, we provide the screeners, and there's kid talks at orientation and so forth, so that we have multiple, if you're not aware, the DIBELS, the Amplify screeners for different areas of literacy. So we can immediately, those if-then is, if we see this, let's immediately start working with those students and give them the support they need, because we don't want to hold them back. To your point, we want to get there right away in literacy while they continue to learn all along the way. So the percentage isn't as great, it's not that big. However, any is big. So
Right, but like I really want a number.
well, I don't want to misquote a number and give you a statistic that's inaccurate right now, but we will absolutely note it and can get back to you in terms of the percentage based on our screeners of who requires that immediate intervention. We can do that, but that may be different per screener. So that's why.
Okay, like just for example, the DIBELS test, as I know what that is.
So we have letter, name, sounds, you have the word recognition, there's
Right.
multiple screeners, so it would depend on which screener, which percentage of those screeners. So overall, what we look at and say, based on these screeners, we have the criteria in terms of who needs additional support, in terms of, in all kindergarten classrooms, we have the literacy specialists push in regardless. So they're getting that support. This, to your question, Anna, just began this year. So you're not going to see immediate results. We are seeing immediate in the classroom, but in terms of that state data, it takes a little bit of time to trickle up. But these are the things based on that data that we're implementing right now. So there is that interventions. So we can give you discrete percentages per assessment because that's in our Dibble screeners data and it's housed in Amplify.
And how do we engage parents once we have that data? Are the parents notified that this is a challenging situation and how they can support their child at home so they can get out of the intervention?
That's a great question and awesome, always part of the conversation. So if it's in the core instruction tier 1, that happens immediately. We don't even have to notify parents, but it is communicated that, hey, we're noticing some of these strengths and needs, and here are some things we're doing in the classroom. And the other part that's really vital is, and here's what we're going to do to monitor that progress, and we're going to come back to you in a few weeks and let you know how your student is doing. Here's some things you can do at home, and that would be the classroom teacher, to your point, to communicate that. So these are all things that, when we say leveraging up tier 1, that are crucial, and we're revisiting and emphasizing all through this year. So that is a crucial piece, that communication.
Terrific. I have the same question, though, for middle and high school. Like, how many kids need this extra support? I know you can't probably answer that question,
Well,
but...
I work with K6 and K8. I work with the IST and CSI, who are so I can answer it to this degree, that we right now are looking at transitions, the transition data in terms of, I'm meeting with high school and middle school literacy specialists and elementary. So we are looking at, here's all our data points and the different data points for different purposes. What supports are needed, and there we fill out spreadsheets. We're looking at these students now to get, in terms of 4th moving up to 5th, and then 8th moving up to the high school. So these are ongoing conversations. Actually, we met before break, and we're going to meet again this Friday in terms of that data. And I was actually just discussing with Will in terms of we are leveraging up tier 1 because that is your tier 1 conversation, because as 8th goes into 9th, it's do they need co-taught? Are we providing them a class right away? And here's the data points. So although we do have this time frame 3 to 5, we feel your sense of urgency, and we are in the midst of having these things happen in the moment.
And parents are also being, invited to that conversation, to the table with their middle schooler and their high schoolers as well?
Again, I love because that involvement's crucial. So when we have the conversation with literacy specialists, they then will go back to their building teams. I will have a conversation as well with the administrators, and then that is shared with parents in terms of here's what we're seeing, here's what we would recommend for scheduling next year, and this level of support.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Kalish?
Thank you. I will try to be very quick. I wanted to say what I really like about this is that, organization is really helpful. We do a lot of really good stuff in this district, and sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, both for us in the district and for families that are entering it, and to have just sort of a streamlined format that everybody's speaking the same language seems like a really great thing, even if nothing, I understand there's a lot more other things being accomplished, but even if that was all that was achieved, that would be a good thing to have in our toolbox. My question was, we have a lot of students that are identified with the GIEP in our district, and I'm curious how that interacts with MTSS, if it interacts at all, versus students who are entering tier 2 or tier 3 because they need academic support because of challenges rather than academic support because of enrichment.
So that idea of asking about, what do all students need, what do some students need, and what do a few students need would apply when we're looking at our students who are performing at higher levels on given skills. So we have had integration and conversation with our, gifted teachers. They've been part of team conversations, opportunities for enrichment extension during Win Time Learn and Lunch and Learn are there. And Dr. Nare and I have had long conversations about looking at opportunities for talent development through some of this work. So that they are included, as thinking partners. But I think that's another place that we continue to grow.
Yeah, so I'm just curious about then the terminology. Would say a freshman that was taking BC calculus, would they be in a tier 3 because they were very few?
It that way. Yeah, I wouldn't think of it that way, but I would think of it as, when teachers are lesson planning, that they do have to be mindful of what is the baseline that students have when they're coming in with some skills.
Okay, I think if that's not something that is clearly laid out, that would be something about how to sort of formalize the framing for those kids too.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question around how we use MTSS to ensure that the core, the sort of that tier 1 curriculum is accessible and actually is accessible for all of our students, and whether just reflecting on what we see of the students that need the tier 2 and tier 3 supplements, does that sort of drive the reflection on, this is helping us understand what isn't accessible in the core 1?
For sure. And that's why, that one slide that talks about the questions that we need to ask, you never want to look at data and say X number of students were successful on a test and move on, right? So teachers are always looking at who may need additional support. One of the, if I flip back a little bit, the one question that I love here that really becomes an anchor for thinking is, what about the instruction and the learner, and the curriculum and the learner needs to be adjusted? So effective data practices, to your point, require us, when we look at how students are performing, to ask, well, how did we teach that? Is there another way that would be more effective? And it challenges us to think of our own practices in terms of making instruction and curriculum accessible to students. When we get to that idea of, at the middle school level, where they were sharing some of those examples right here, when you see the tier 1 top 3, those strategies that they're talking about, these should be shared. This came out of looking at what you're talking about, where they looked at some of the students who were having difficulty and determined a pattern where, if some of these things were really universally applied and we had concrete understanding or shared understanding of what exactly that looks like. And this conversation, when you look at it seems a little like clear directions, monitoring, reinforcement, but when you unpack those and what that really looks like in a classroom, it aligns with the work of John Hattie on highly effective practices in the classroom, and helps develop teacher understanding about how to improve instruction and, to your point, accessibility for students.
Thank you. Dr. Sautner, did you have questions?
I do, and some might be complementary to a few that were asked, so it seems like we're all on the same page. Okay, so let's start with a baseline. It feels like each grade band is in a different level. If this is a 3 to 5 year implementation plan to get it rolling, I know it's an iterative process and you'll constantly be tweaking it, but where are we in the phases of that 3 to 5 year for elementary, for middle, and for high school?
So it really depends on what exactly we're talking about. This is a framework for a lot of practices related to curriculum and instruction. So, if you looked at a couple of the examples Dr. Martin Patone gave, a couple of those have to do with what are called, not to get too far in the weeds, but something called decision rules or eligibility criteria, which can help identify students who may need additional supports. Developing those for every subject or for critical subjects, that takes time. That's curriculum development work. And developing those types of articulation documents, as Ms. Kalish was saying, it's great to all be speaking the same language, but developing that language takes time. So depending on what we're talking about, like you said, it's an iterative process. In terms of the TIPS process, we're in a shorter cycle. It's based on implementation science. So when we're looking at teams learning something and really becoming proficient with the use of it, they're closer to being at the end of the goal. We turn it around and work with teachers for next year. And then you look at PBIS and SEL, which are another sort of strand of the work. So it's 3 to 5 years to develop implementation overall, but it's difficult to unpack the many layers of it, because the key areas we've been focusing on really our tier 1 effective use of data and the decision rules and curricular infrastructure for this year. So as we move into next year, we can take each of these elements and put them sort of on a cycle, like what are the goals for next year? The one example I gave for Illuminate, might be we're putting in our progress monitoring or, prototyping some of that this spring. So it really depends on what we're talking about. That's kind of a really big question. But when we look at our overall priority goals, it is tied to implementation science and looking at those stages, which we look at more of a 3-year cycle.
So I'll go back to my question. You shared earlier that MTSS implementation will take 3 to 5 years. Where are we in that 3 to 5 year plan?
We're in year 2.
We're in year 2 of it. So,
Yep.
Over the next 3 more years, we'll have a general movement of MTSS on all grade bands.
Right now, high school is only in year 1. So high school may need a little bit longer. I would say the other area of high school that's challenging is just the breadth of content and content groups and the amount of curriculum development or articulation there. So I would say they might be a year beyond that.
Got it. Okay. Now, next question is similar in the same family. When we're looking at MTSS and the high quality of data-driven decision-making, how integrated across all the teachers with the data implementation are we at this point? And what's the long game? Like, how long will that take? Because I remember having this conversation about a year ago, and it wasn't very clear that Illuminate was going to be a tool that all the teachers could use for this data. So it's great to collect data, but if we're not sharing it across teachers and across grade bands, that's a barrier to implementation. So where are we on that progress?
So there are 2 parts to that. One is shared access to the data that's in Illuminate, and the other one is the teacher understanding of the data practices. And for this year, the leads who've been trained include our principals, assistant principals, the instructional support team, CSIs, and our assistant principal leads at the high school. So they are the ones who've had the training. The teacher professional development this year related to those data practices, you could consider job-embedded learning, as they have experienced effective data practices, but as facilitated by someone else. The communication by the teams in K4 has been, and next year you're going to be doing this as your own professional learning community. So it's with this sort of turnaround training idea, but we'll have more explicit training for teachers next year. So this year was our leads, with the teachers having some job embedded learning. Next year would be the teachers having more explicit training, so that we could have teachers more independently applying that the following year, if next year is sort of a training and implementation year. As far as data sharing and Illuminate, as professional learning communities are setting shared goals, the data is in Illuminate, and the teams can talk about that and use data walls. So as we have people who would have a need to have access to the data, they could be given access if they have a need for that data.
Got it. So, okay, next question. So MTSS is proven to improve behavior, achievement, inclusive practices. What's our long-term timeline to look at that and to say, here's some of the things we're looking at, this is some of the large scope practices that have been affected by this work, and what are the milestones and benchmarks along the way?
There are a couple parts to that. In terms of milestones and benchmarks, like there's some very specific things like, completion or articulation of decision rules for subject areas, data cycles that are aligned, data meeting cycles that are aligned to assessment cycles. So those would be some really obvious things that you could sort of check off and say, we see this is an improvement. This is working better to have these data meetings following the assessment cycle. In terms of, I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Is that what you're looking for examples of?
I think so. I think that's like on the lower level, but as a district, when we're saying we've implemented this, in 5 years we've implemented this is how we're going to start really fully understanding the impact of this implementation.
So when I think about it in that way, I'll go back to what Will Williams was saying, that idea that we're speaking the same language across the grade level, and when we're looking at our intervention programs overall, we can ask those questions like how effective is our intervention program for all students who participate in it, because we'll have more centrally accessible data, things like that. So I think we'll be able to not only monitor our own effectiveness, but also set goals for our own improvement. I think that's going to be something that's going to be possible once we have, more centralized data and we've grown into some of those practices as teams.
Can I also
Great.
jump in and add really quickly, Dr. Sotner? I just wanted to note that in terms of bringing this type of framework to the district, I think it was also connected and in response to, we have a special education evaluation program report that talked about consistency in our data practices, our interventions, pre-referral interventions that were somewhat disparate across the district. And I think this gives us a really sound framework to address that particular concern. So as I think about the vision for this work and outcomes at the end of the day, I think that's, for me, one of the one important outcome that we see is that we have consistency in data practices, and so that we ensure that those interventions that we're applying before referrals for evaluation, et cetera, are done on a consistent basis and not just based on who a student has as a teacher, what their lived experience is, but because we've addressed them at a tier 1 level universally, and we're ensuring that there's a playing field that meets kids' needs and differently depending on what their needs are at every level. So I think that's one of the bigger goals as I see it, having been involved with that prior evaluation work. And I think it's also based in the equity policy that we've created, which is also aligned with that work, so that we're, again, creating experiences where students have consistent experiences across the district, no matter where they are. It goes to that common language piece, but ideally I think we're all speaking from the same point of view as an outcome of this.
That's really helpful. And also in that same vein, it would be when we look at recommendations for students going from middle school to high school and placement in honors, in AP, that is data-driven and kind of removes biases from teachers, correct?
Correct. I think any time that we're making a transition or that there are opportunities for choice or, we talked about parent and guardian involvement and making sure that, again, there's that consistency of experience, consistency of reporting information to families. And again, I think it's great work to build on. And I think the vision is that, again, regardless of where that transition point or where that referral point is that we've done the work to ensure that every student has that equitable level of access to whatever that opportunity is.
Fantastic. Okay, last question. This kind of goes off of what Lucy was asking earlier. It's interesting to look at the data, and so much of this conversation is saying, like, what do the kids need? What do the kids need? Does Illuminate give you the ability to look across all the students to start noticing patterns about the curriculum or about the class type to see what do the teachers need, what supports they need? Dr. Gaudioso, you started answering this earlier, but the next kind of level of that question was, what are the interventions, and can we see, this is what we've learned from this MTSS model. This is the interventions for the curriculum or the teachers that's needed. Because many of the things that we were talking about, like ensuring that all of your students are getting it and building other supports, are things that like the intermediate unit does with PATAN or that UDL does. So are we able to eventually see how this is affecting professional development learning and curriculum changes as well, not just student intervention changes?
So what goes into we put into Illuminate what we want in there. So I'll say the beginning of the work is looking at our, once our assessments are in there, looking at the way that we can use the analytics, they can be aligned to standards. So when we put into Illuminate assessments that are aligned to the standards, a team can unpack student performance in light of the standards, which can inform both what students need, but also maybe raise some questions about instruction or curriculum. So that can be seen in Illuminate. And right now, the assessments that are in Illuminate, some of them have been longstanding assessments we've been using, some are newly created, and created in mind with the idea in mind that we want to be able to unpack in the way that you just described.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't work my mute button tonight. Sorry, thanks.
Great, thank you all very much. Just last pass. Great, thank you very much for your time and presentation. And I think we will now move on to our second presentation of the evening, the full day kindergarten sort of presentation / update.
I haven't seen Christine in a while, so I have to say hi to her. She looked great. So we're going to give a brief update on our progress for full-day kindergarten since the last time we spoke, and also an update on the kindergarten survey results. Dr. Christina Paul, well, hopefully most of you know, has worked in our district for a while and left us recently to take a different position. However, clearly she's still attached to us because she's doing work in the district for us. And so she did the evaluation of the survey results for kindergarten. So she's going to review those with you, and then I'll do a really brief update on where we are and where we're headed moving forward. So I'm going to turn over to Dr. Paul.
Thank you. Well, it is lovely to be back with you this evening and, to talk about data. That's what I do here, and I love it. So the survey that was provided by the Lower Merion Full Day Kindergarten Committee, the Planning Committee, included 13 items. Several of them were screening items that would allow participants who might not have children to skip over the questions that asked about things that were related to having children, right? So that's skip logic. So several of the items at the beginning were screening items, then there were meteor items, and then there were several items at the end that were open to everybody who participated in this survey. The survey was distributed electronically, and it was open to all in the community, including those who do not currently have students in Lower Merion. This survey was open from mid-December through about the first week of January this year. So a really nice, robust response. Over 4,000 people responded to the survey. And I'm going to give you a very high-level overview to the survey results, and know that in that executive summary, it breaks down the details in much more nuanced ways, specifically for the people on the Planning Committee who are using this data. But for the sake of our very big overall summary tonight, over 4,000 people took the survey, and about 36% of them were individuals who reported that they either had future kindergarten students but no students in the district currently, or they have current students in the district plus they have students who are coming into the district. So about 1,500 of the participants have future kindergartners. You can see the breakdown of the responses by the different school communities that they reported. We had 111 people who just were unsure of which feeder pattern they were in, but overall you can see it's a pretty representative trend of the size of the schools of each of the elementary schools. And you can also see a breakdown of the different types of families or participants who were responding within each of those communities. Overall, out of the 4,000 plus people who made it to the end and got to the question where they were agreeing or disagreeing with their level of support. 87% of people said that they either agree or strongly agree with supporting the district moving forward with implementing full-day kindergarten. It was pretty clear that there was a majority of support there. I wanted to dig a little deeper into the participants who reported that they were either neutral or they disagreed or strongly disagreed. And so this is where we had quite a bit of really robust, open-ended qualitative data to really read through and dissect. So we separated out the themes from those participants who reported that they were neutral versus those that they said they disagree or strongly disagree. And you can see the N sizes for each of those groups there. So we had about 150 participants report that they were neutral. Now remember, this is 151 out of 4,000. Okay, so let's just keep that perspective in mind. The themes that they discussed in their open-ended responses really centered around questions or concerns about funding, concerns with overcrowding. We had a couple, and again, there's sample responses in the executive summary. I'll just highlight just a few for the sake of illustrating the themes. With the overcrowding, one person said, I am worried that the school district just pushed 5th grade out of elementary school to alleviate overcrowding. Won't full-day kindergarten result in overcrowding again? So that's a sample, an example of the type of concern that was being reported. We also heard concerns about how the additional time would be spent. Some people were unwilling to say if they agreed or disagreed because they didn't yet know what the full day program would look like. Is it more recess time? Is it more transportation to get to and from the building? There were so many questions about how would that time actually be spent. There were also a few people who said that it really depended on whether it was mandatory or optional. We had a small minority of participants who reported that they felt it should be an optional program, that there are some people in the community who still feel that a half-day program is right for their kid. And so that theme did come up here in that particular question. And then a number of people just said that they wanted more details before they could really feel confident whether they agree or disagree with supporting. And then you see at the bottom of this slide the themes from respondents who answered that they either disagreed or strongly disagreed. A lot of those people indicated they were opposed to the cost of it. They felt that full-day kindergarten is not necessary. Some felt that it was even not developmentally appropriate to have students in school for that long at that age. A number of people reported that they thought it was just childcare, that people in the community want this just because they need free childcare or want free childcare. That theme came through. Also, a number of people said that they would prefer that the district turn their attention to other issues that they felt were more important at this point in time. The idea of lights on Arnold Field came up quite a bit, as did the delayed school start time. And then again, the theme of overcrowding came through again. But remember, this is a small minority of the overall set of responses that we received. So now to just highlight in on that, about 1,500 respondents who have future kindergartners, I wanted to dive a little more deeply into that particular group of people. So 9 out of 10 of those respondents said that they would prefer a full-day kindergarten in Lower Merion over any other option. It's about 10% who still feel like they would prefer their private program or whatever else it may be. But so 9 out of 10, that's pretty strong, majority there. The next question then asked, if you had to send your kindergartner to a building other than your home school, would you still prefer and still enroll your child in the full-day kindergarten program? And 7 out of 10 said that they would. So 7 out of 10, 70% of the 1,500 families, said that they would still enroll their child. Of the remaining 3, 1 out of 10, 10% said, nope, I would not enroll my child if they had to go to another building. 2 out of 10, 20% said, I'm not sure. So I wanted to dive into the themes of those who were unsure or said plain no, we would not be interested in enrolling if the child has to go to a different school other than the neighborhood school. So there were a number of responses in these themes. So there was a follow-up question that asked for them to share more information about why they said no or unsure. And so these were the themes that came through in those qualitative responses. So a lot of them just really wanted more information and said it really depends on the length of the bus ride, the proximity to home. Some people were concerned that if there was an emergency in the middle of the day or the child was sick, that they might have to drive across the district to pick up their kindergartner rather than to their local neighborhood school. People wondered about the quality of the facility, just not knowing what building it might be, just wondered. Also wondering about the quality of the program. Again, that uncertainty about what the full day schedule would include was something that people revealed that's certainly on their mind. A number of things came through that I lumped together as sibling considerations. These were from the families who have older children, and there were themes that came through that were related to wanting their children in the same elementary school. If I have a kindergartner, a first grade, and a second grader, I want them all to be in the same building together for the community aspect, for the back to school night events, those sorts of community building events. It was a concern that maybe it would stretch them too thin if they had to be pulled across more than one building for those elementary years. There were also parents, respondents who indicated that the traveling to school was a concern for them, whether they be on the bus together. Questions came up about would my kindergartner be picked up at the front door to be driven to another building perhaps, or would my kindergartner go to the local elementary, the neighborhood school, and then be transported to the kindergarten program. So different transportation questions came up, questions about siblings who walk together to school, these sorts of things. We also had concerns about juggling multiple drop-off and pickup points. So again, if I have a kindergartner, an elementary student, and a middle school student, let's say, and now with the times, at the time of the survey, we were still using this current school day schedule, so not really fully understanding, would a kindergarten start and dismissal time be the same as an elementary if they were split across buildings? What would that mean for picking up and dropping off across more than 2 buildings, right, in this case? So these were some of the issues that came up for these 300 or so people who were just unsure about whether they would be comfortable sending their kindergartner to a second building. The 2 other main themes that came through were concerns with so many transitions. Thinking about the daily transitions that students might have if they were to have to go to their neighborhood school and then transport to another building was seen as a concern. But there was also a concern about the number of transitions an elementary student would experience in kindergarten, maybe in another building, then back for first grade through 4th grade in their elementary building, and then sure enough, the next year you're going off to middle school. And so that just was seen as so many transitions that people brought that up as a concern. And then finally, there were a group of people who were concerned about transporting a child of this age on the bus, thinking that the child is too young to be riding a bus, particularly if they don't have a sibling or a neighborhood friend who's riding with them to be kind of a big buddy looking out for them. And there were also a number of questions for the people who live within walk zones and wondering, you know, why, if they live within a walk zone and perhaps purchased the home specifically for the walk zone, they were concerned that they may now have to send their kindergartner on a bus to go to school rather than walking as a family to their neighborhood school. So that just illustrates some of the themes that we saw in some of that, you know, the people who were unsure or said flat out no, that they would not be interested in sending their child to a kindergarten if it was not located within their neighborhood school. So again, there was an executive summary with many more details, lots of tables, breakdowns of the information for the committee, but as a high-level summary, I just wanted to point out a few takeaways that emerged. One, there is a high level of support for implementing full-day kindergarten, even for those whose households did not include future kindergarten students. The cost of implementation continues to be a serious concern for many, as is the thought that our elementary schools may become overcrowded again. Many of them highlighted their interest in shifting our, I'm speaking as if I'm still here, our attention, shifting the board and the school district's attention to other issues that they feel may be more important than this particular issue. And if the off-site programming is necessary, the logistics for families with older children will become more complicated. So I would recommend that the committee and the district really lean into collecting information from those families to really get a firm understanding of what those logistical challenges may be, whether it be before and after school care across multiple buildings, or the various models that could be used for transporting students to and from the alternative buildings. And that flows now into some planning considerations for Dr. McGloin and the committee. One of the things that came up was this idea of whether or not it should be an option. So the idea being you can still provide a half-day program and a full-day program and allow parents to choose which of those programs is the best suited for their child. That was definitely an interest that was communicated. Whether or not it's logistically possible, I'm not sure, but I just wanted to highlight that as a consideration. Something else, really think about that the idea of the transportation challenges and thinking through the different models that could be used, whether it's a transfer system like we use for private, like you use for private school transportation at this point in time. What does it look like for those students who are in the walk zone? Just thinking carefully about those logistics will be important. And then finally, just remain mindful that many families experienced or communicated that they have many, many questions. What will the program look like? How will the child be spending their time? Will the time be spent in ways that will be enriching and give additional opportunities for the arts or special areas or play-based learning? Or will it be more direct instruction? And so just people have questions. They just want to know what that program is going to look like. So the more information, the earlier to assist people with the decisions that would be in front of them, the better. So that is my portion. I will kick it over to Dr. McGloin.
So the executive summary, we'll send you on Friday so that you have that. And then it's going to be posted on the website as well for our community to see. So they have, that'll be available for everybody. So in addition to the survey and looking at the survey results, we have done some additional work since the last time we spoke. I'm going to talk about each of these bulleted items in a minute, but we talked about a room utilization chart for all of our elementary schools. Our kindergarten committee has continued to meet, and we talked about with the board, and since then, how do we expand K+ in the 23-24 school year, and what could that look like? And so we have had that conversation as well. So this is an example of the room utilization chart that every single building principal at the elementary has filled out. It's just a snip of one huge chart from one of the schools, because every space in the building has been designated by, obviously the staff was taken off, but the staff that was assigned to it, grade levels, if there's more than one staff member assigned to a space, that's in the chart, including the days of the week and the times that the facility is used, so that we can then take that chart, those charts, and take a look at them and take our maps and really start to talk about, are there different ways that we could use those rooms? And so within the next 2 weeks, we'll be in every single building again to relook at all of our facilities to see if there's any structural changes we can make, or if we can reallocate rooms so that we can find space for some of the schools that really are tighter on space. So that'll happen over the next 2 weeks, and in the interim, all of our building principals have completed these room utilization charts for us. Our kindergarten committee met last on March 16th. They reviewed the draft survey results that you saw from Dr. Paul. Specifically, they were looking for anything that lacked clarity in interpretation. So like those N values that you saw in there were added, because it is important to understand that when we're talking about the people that maybe didn't agree, it was really a small number when you think about the large group that was sampled. So that was something that they gave us as a feedback for it. We were looking for themes within the report, and so that was the feedback that the committee gave. In addition to that, there was discussions on the implication of the survey results moving forward. And you saw some of that when Dr. Paul just talked, but the committee also talked about how does that really, what does that imply for our work moving forward. In addition to that, we talked about the focus of our groups moving forward. We won't be meeting every month. Our subcommittee will actually meet in the interim, and then we'll start to come back together again on a monthly basis in the fall. Our facilities subgroup will meet next with our whole entire team, and so we'll look at more subcommittee meetings first. And then we talked about what K+ is going to look like moving forward, and then our plan moving forward. The expansion of K+, as you know, currently we have K+ in Penn Valley, Penn Wynne, and Belmont Hills. We will be expanding K+ to the 3 remaining schools next year, Kenwood, Gladwood, and Merion. Our intention is to have those classrooms in those schools, so the 3 schools will house the K+ classrooms. In the spring kindergarten orientation, the parents will be notified that we'll be doing a kindergarten screener for all students. We've only done it in the past in the schools that have had K+, so all of our students will be screened throughout the district this year. And the screening will begin at the end of the school year. It'll continue through the summer. And then we'll make final placements for those K+ programs in the summer. We always leave some room in each of those classrooms for the end of the school year, students that register a little bit late, just to make sure that we have enough space that might be needed when school starts. And so all 6 of our schools will have K+ in the upcoming school year. We've looked at the cost for it from a staffing perspective, also what materials and resources we need to make that happen. And we feel like we're in a really good place to have K+ in all 6 schools moving forward. So, just as a big overview of what the kindergarten project will look like, you can see by month through the summer of 2020 all of the different tasks that we have, and the flags really are our milestones. So our facilities upgrade obviously is a really big milestone, because that's where we're going to be housing our programs. The curriculum writing is a big milestone for us, because that's the programming itself. Notification of parents and hiring of staff, you see flags with as well. But we really try to think about all the different tasks that have to occur to make sure that this gets off the ground, and the timing that is associated with all of those tasks moving forward. So questions at this point for Dr. Paul or myself, we can go back to either of them.
Thank you to both of you for the presentation. I'd like to open it for questions. Ms. Garrison.
Thank you for the presentation. I was curious, how long was the survey open?
It was So it was mid-December through the first week of January.
Okay. And what's the total population of the district?
60,000, what is it?
63,000?
Yeah.
Since you like data and math, so what percentage of the population participated in a survey at 4,000 people total, right, out of the 63,000?
Well, one of the complications with a survey of this sort is that it's a free link open to anyone. And we're trusting that each person who participates only participates once and that they are actually living within the district.
But do we know that or we don't?
Well, we don't.
Okay. No, that makes it more challenging because if we can't verify the people that actually participated, even just only did it one time.
In the world of survey design, there's many different ways to do it. And a more
Robust.
in a more robust way, you would actually do like a sampling design where you would identify how many out of the entire population you need to sample, and it would be a much more precise and much more robust, but also a much more complicated and costly type of survey. So you really have to weigh the benefits and disadvantages of doing different types of surveys. In this case, I don't want to speak for the district, but when you want to invite broad participation, opening a link such as this to broad participation is a way of extending to the community an invitation. We want to hear from you. This survey was primarily intended to be qualitative in design. It was mostly the open-ended items that the committee was interested in hearing about. And so if it were a person who was not living in the district and was just some random person, they really wouldn't have much to say that would make sense.
I would be less,
Right.
I wouldn't think that would probably happen, but I do think it's possible that people could have participated more than once. That part I do think could have possibly happened.
That is possible, but I will say, based on my experience from previously being employed by the district and doing this as part of my job, I would always review the instances for looking for duplicates, and it was always a fraction. I might find 10 to 12 instances where it's looked as if somebody had submitted the survey more than once. It was, in my experience here, having done a good, healthy amount of surveys for the district, it was always a fraction. Not enough to really sway the results of this, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Schaffmeister? Oh.
Sorry, and just as a follow-up, I know we were talking about when we were putting together this survey, one of the things we really wanted to do was reach potential, like, rising kindergarten parents and families, and that's a really hard group for us to reach in this, and so it was hard, like, we couldn't go and like look up census data and send a letter to every single person who had a rising kindergartner in our district. That would have been prohibitively, there we go, expensive for the district to do, and also wouldn't have worked super well on our timeline.
Ms. Schaffmeister?
Okay, thank you. Nice to see you again. And I had a question about it. I'm happy that the K Plus is being expanded to all the schools. I'm just wondering for Kenwood, Gladwin, and Merion, is it going to be, is this going to require additional teachers, and is there any structural items being dealt with?
It does. It requires 3 additional staff members for the 3 K plus classrooms. We're going to run the same program, so structurally, programmatically, it'll be the same program at all 6 of the buildings.
I had heard, we had heard before that Merion was at capacity, so we've been able to find space to do.
Yeah, so at Merion, we're going to try to split like a 6 and a 6 cohort, so running the same program, but making two smaller sections that would be included in the full day kindergarten class, in the regular kindergarten classroom rather, and then 6 in the afternoon and 6 in the morning. And so with that, the principal feels like he'll be able to make it work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Rack?
Sure. So a few things. On this Gantt chart, if we dig in here, all of these decisions almost require board approval to go into implementation, am I right? So wondering, what is the timeline for the board to actually have the information for us to vote, to be able to then do these things or make modifications for you to have different plans?
Yeah, and I don't think I did mention this, but by May 15th, our goal will be to come back to you and give you an estimated idea of the costs for it. And then also we'll come back and we'll give you an update on facilities to talk about what kind of upgrades we might actually need in May. Obviously, you're not going to vote all the way through, but it may take us that amount of time from a facilities upgrade perspective. It's a long time.
Oh, I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm saying that timeline, I have concerns. Would you even be able to complete them with what we have to vote on to then go out to bid for some of these things or get implemented?
Yeah.
How you have it outlined?
So by May 15th, we're hoping to come back with any kind of, with an idea of what facilities, structural ideas that we maybe make or need to make. That's of this year, right? So, but I don't think, honestly, that we're looking to make major facilities structural changes so that you would have to go out to bid or do those types of things, but it might be take a wall down. That's a possibility that we would do internally. That's possible. So hopefully within the next month, we'll come back with some more ideas on that, definitive ideas.
Okay, and my second question is specifically about the curriculum writing. My assumption is that well, actually, I don't know why you're doing it so late. That doesn't make sense to me. If you could clarify. My initial assumption was you were including teachers, but even within that, could we put other resources to move it up? Because aligned to the data that Ms. Paul, you shared for parents to make a decision if they're going to go to this program, I assume people will need to know earlier rather than later how we are approaching the full day program.
Right, so our intention is to do site visits as soon as we start next school year. So you see that October, we'll kick off and we'll do some site visits to look at programs in other school districts.
But why not do that now?
I mean, we could, we just have a lot going on. It's not that we couldn't try to start the site visits now, we could, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess my push would just be that timeline is very late to then implement a whole learning program that we've never done in the fall. I have major concerns about having curriculum writing from December through April. It's just my feedback.
Right, and so, I mean, personally, I don't necessarily have that concern, I hear you, but we would be writing curriculum next school year for this, and because it wouldn't be implemented until the following school year. So you write the curriculum, then you train, which we've been doing the training on, for implementation in September, which, right, doesn't feel like an extremely tight timeline. It feels like
I just don't know what we've been doing up until this point on this, about curriculum, like if we voted months ago. Sorry, it's just my question. Oh.
No, we haven't. Even back when we talked about this, we talked about doing site visits starting next school year, not this school year, but next school year.
Okay, that's my miss for not seeing it. I guess I'm curious who's prioritizing this, because this isn't a small undertaking, putting full day kindergarten into the district, and it doesn't seem as if due diligence is being done to like do these tasks with fidelity to the level needed to make sure it happens in a way that's up to the mission and vision of our district. So I'd just like some more information.
Understood.
Mr. Lee?
Thank you. So I was going to point out as well that the board hasn't actually approved this stuff. So there's an implication here that this program is approved, which it's not yet. By May 15th, are you expecting to have the total program cost or just teaching staff and facilities costs?
No, total program costs, and that's.
So there's a lot of open-ended questions about transportation. We're expecting to have those answered and some sort of proposal by the 15th?
We do, yeah, we already know Mr. Vincent believes that he would need 3 additional bus routes for this to happen.
Okay, and food service and all of those ancillary
service.
costs will be, okay,
Yep, yes.
okay.
We've already started that. We just need to finalize it to get it to you, because facilities is a piece of it as well, but we have already started doing all the estimates for it. So our intention is by May 15th to
Right.
bring you an estimated cost, total cost of all of it.
Yeah. Actually, and candidly, my concern is less around the one-time costs, things like facilities, and more on the ongoing annual budgetary implications.
Yeah,
Thank
understood. For sure.
Ms. Kalish?
Well, I'll be a little sunnier about this. I know everybody's been a little down on it. I thought this presentation was incredibly clarifying for me and incredibly clarifying for the people I've been talking to and have been asking me questions about where the board is and where the district is on this program going forward, what we're going to need to fund when, and I think as Dr. Paul's description showed, we need to find the funding for this because it's the most support I've seen for anything come up in this district since I've been on this board. And let me see if I took notes on anything. Can you quickly go over the criteria for a student going into the K+ program?
Do you want to talk about that for a second? Yes.
So we use, it's an assessment called the KISA, and it's a kindergarten essential skills assessment that looks at areas that are predictive of kindergarten success. And it uses standard scoring. It includes some academic skills as well as like OT and some math, both math and literacy and language. Students, what we'll do is schedule and starting after orientation and student scores are rank ordered to identify students with greatest need. And that way principals can start making placements in the summer.
Okay, great, thanks. I also wanted to point out, Megan, what was the meeting where we talked about where Aldous is going to come and talk about transportation? No, it's
Next Monday.
next month or next month?
No, Monday.
Next
Sorry,
Monday.
next week.
Okay.
Same time, same place.
Okay, that'd be great if we could follow up with him if he had any ability to, I don't expect him to have all the answers to all of these questions, but if he could sort of generally address what the transportation department is working on, since that's clearly one of the primary areas that people are worried about. And I understand this was done several months ago, and so it may be something just that people are concerned because they don't have the information. Some of the things these people are, that our community is talking about may end up being an issue, and it may just not come to pass the way that people are worrying about, and I'd love to be able to assuage any concerns that we possibly could have. I know there's a big lift to make a lot of this go, but this is a really important program. I really appreciate all the hard work from both of you lovely doctors, 4 of you lovely doctors up here in the front, and everyone who's worked on this, the full day K committee. It's really important, and I appreciate all your hard work and your clarity. Thank you.
Dr. Sotner, did you have any questions?
Yes, just one really quick one. I also agree that I love the report. It was really helpful. I really like the way that the executive summary was laid out as well. So I just appreciate the presentation. Second, my only question is really to kind of add on to Shayla's there as well. Will the main meeting be able to address some of the questions that came up in this report? So the one, for example, was interesting about an optional full day, half day. We ask surveys, we ask people for their opinion. I just want to make sure we're addressing it, even if it's saying we are not able to do this. Can we kind of wrap those together at the main meeting?
We absolutely can. And it is something that we've had a lot of discussions about optional and a mandatory full day, even with the committee, and we just don't feel like we're able to pull it off. My experience as a principal in elementary school, I actually had optional kindergarten and full day as something you went into lottery for, but it was a really large school district, and it's just harder to be able to pull off, especially when we look at the results of the survey. But we can speak to all of those items, or at least try to speak to all of those items at the next meeting for certain. Yes.
I have a quick question around in the schools where K+ exists now, if you have seen a difference or a decrease in the number of kids participating in the targeted K program?
In EDK?
Yes.
So we have less, in the schools that we still have EDK in the schools that have K+, where we have less students participating in EDK than we did in the past in those schools.
So do you think that that will help in the remaining schools that are tight on space? Because you know that it might just be kids moving into a different supplementary K program?
We've talked about it, and it's a possibility, especially in our smaller schools, that we wouldn't need EDK. For those schools are only like one section of it versus what we've needed in the past. So we've had that conversation with the addition of the K+ program in 3 other schools. I think we'll see that at least tighten up. I'm not sure it'll be eliminated fully, especially in our larger schools.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Garrison?
Yes, I had one more question in reference to the K+ program. Excuse me. How many additional teachers will be needed for that? And what's the estimated cost for the K+ rollout in those 3 additional schools?
So it's 3 additional teachers, 1 in each of the buildings. And then I think it was $20,000 a classroom, right? I think we estimated $20,000 a classroom. But it's in our budget. We had budgeted for the upcoming school year already, anticipating that that was something that we wanted to consider. And so we already did budget for it, but it was $20,000.
Per classroom, plus salaries?
Plus the teacher. That's just for resources and materials.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So just technically speaking, that is part of our budget that we'll be proposing, so it would be yours to authorize eventually. So with the caveat that these are proposed items as part of our budget planning for next year, so.
Great, thank you very much for the presentation. It was nice to see you again, Dr. Paul. So we've had 2 presentations tonight, so I thank you all for your time, and we're going to move on with our agenda. We have no additional agenda items to add on this evening, so we do have time now for our audience recognition. At this time, Ms. LaPera, will you open the chat feature? So let me rephrase that. At this time, Ms. LaPera will open the chat feature. And if you are watching from home, you'll see a 10-minute timer appear on your screen. You can submit your comments and/or questions via the chat feature. Please be sure to begin with your full name and where you reside within the district in order for your comment to be shared. That's important for both in-person and online public comment. And Ms. LaPera, do we have any in-person comment for tonight's meeting?
Yes, we do. We have Ruth Jenkin and then Jill Altschuler.
Welcome back. The decision of Ruth Jenkin, Winwood, the decision to table the time change was a difficult, but I feel a correct one. All of the research on sleep, of which Dr. Paul was a big part of, we did all that research, meeting after meeting, show that there is, definitely sleep deprivation, but there are other factors affecting lack of sleep that has nothing to do with the school system or with the time change, such as late night gaming, texting, television, as well as too much homework. So these students will be going to college where they'll have to manage their own sleep needs as well as everything else. This also puts our youngest, most vulnerable learners at risk. They need to be at school, and they are at their best during the early hours of the day. Thank you. Speaks for the trees.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins.
Hi, ready? Jill Altschuler, Merion Station. I need every second. Okay, I've come to listen to the MTSS presentation for the third time, and it's a lot of work, and I appreciate it all. I was wondering if we could focus a little more on mental health again. It's part of the framework that has a little bit to do with the behavioral aspect and the social emotional aspect, but it also is its own thing. And there is a lot that of examples of what we could be doing, and I think what we really need to be doing for our students, because we can have as much tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 academic supports there, but I think we all know that when kids are experiencing anxiety and depression, they can't learn. So we need to figure out how to get more specific mental health supports in that framework. And I know it's a years-long process, but I think that is really something we need to put on the front end of things. And I want to say that it seems like there's amazing work being done at the middle school level, and which makes me really happy. But on the one hand, and then it also kind of makes me sad because I feel like things are just dropped, and high school is not getting any of these great programs and school culture coordinators and so everything that I've learned through the presentation and from talking to some of the people from the middle school. And I just feel like we need to, really step on the gas and focus on our high schoolers for mental health and community building. The ACEs acronym, and the acronyms are not enough for whatever they're considered to be, PBIS, SEL. We need mental health, we need community building, we need to utilize advisory in a productive way. And I hear a lot about family engagement, which was part of the first slide, and I just don't understand exactly what that means and how it's being done, because I show up, I'm passionate, and I want to be engaged, and I don't feel like I can barely get a foot in the door. And all I want to do is to help make things better. And I feel like I'm seen as a nuisance, and it's very discouraging and disempowering. And you said something about thinking partners, and I feel like there's so many great thinking partners out there in our parent and guardian community that I just feel like we need to do a better job of engaging with all of us stakeholders out here that have lots of good experience and ideas. And lots of other stuff, but boop, 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 boop. Thanks. I know. That's okay.
Thank you, Ms. Altschuler.
That's it for the in-person.
We have one comment so far, on the Zoom. It's from Janet Lipsitz of Merion Station. It says, Megan, recently at a communications committee meeting, you brought up the desire to do more community dialogue and engagement. We shared eagerness. A group of community members are excited to bring an opportunity to the greater Lmsd community. We are partnering with Braver Angels, a national organization that builds civic trust based on common ground. The first in a series of community dialogues will be focused on skills for difficult conversation, and the ultimate goal of the ongoing dialogues is building the foundation for a trusting, cohesive community. All over the country, there are school communities grappling with divisiveness, and we believe that we have a moment to be proactive and be role models for the broader communities, and especially for our kids. We hope that all stakeholders, including staff, students, staff administration, and community members will contribute to this opportunity. We send an invitation to all of admin and board and look forward to your responses. The next comment is from Lorraine Carter of Ardmore. Thank you for the presentation on MTSS. Do you plan to report the data and results soon? What is happening with MTSS and its benefits and outcomes? There are 3 minutes left, but those are the only comments thus far.
Thank you. So we will be on pause for 3 minutes just to be true to our chat feature. So we will be back.
I'll jump in really quickly just because Mr. Lee pointed out today something to me. If everybody wants to look at their agenda where we're looking at the page HR2 for new hires, I'm really excited because we are hopefully going to be welcoming 2 new bus drivers to our fleet. Welcome Mr. Reynolds and Mr. Tribble. I'm really excited. If anybody here or anybody watching at home wants to drive a bus for Lower Merion School District, we will help you get your CDL. We will help you get your S certification. We are a great place to work, and you get a bonus for being a new school bus driver in our district. So that is my regular plug, everyone. So, yay, buses.
We have one more. Thank you, Ms. LaPera. Ezra Wood of Merion Station. As the administration and school board work out the minor improvements needed to implement healthy school start times for fall 2024, I urge you to not move middle school any earlier. 8 o'clock is already a compromise and on the early side. Starting middle school before 8 o'clock should be a non-starter, and please get rid of homeroom.
Great, thank you very much. So we will move on. We do have one recommended action this evening. I'm going to ask Ms. Schaefer to read that.
Of course, the superintendent, acting superintendent, recommends that the Board of School Directors approve the attached human resource actions HR1 and HR2.
Thank you. Does the board have any questions about that? No? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Dr. Sotner? Any opposed?
Aye, sorry. Can't work the mute. I'm sorry, it's so slow tonight, sorry.
We're all good. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Upcoming meeting dates. If anyone is interested in a preview of Mr. Vilson's transportation presentation, he will be presenting for the ISC tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. Upcoming board meetings include this Thursday, April 13th, the Facilities and Purchasing Committee meeting at 8:30 a.m. here in the boardroom. Next Monday, April 17th, is the regular business board meeting at 8 p.m. April 19th and April 26th, the 2 following Wednesdays, are the first 2 of our Finance Committee meetings for this year. They are both at 8:30 a.m. and will be here. All of the meetings will be live streamed and recorded. Thank you all. The meeting is adjourned.